Welcome to Mystara for a look at the enigma of the Alphatian military. How does an empire filled with high-level wizards not conquer the world? They've got 1,000 maximum-level wizards that should steamroller the opposition, but somehow are blocked at every turn by a bunch of uppity fighters. Get ready for a tale of incompetence, hubris, and enough dysfunction to make an army supply sergeant break out in hives. But regardless of how bad the regular army is, you can always fall back on the wizards for support, unless the wizards can't be bothered because they're busy. I'm Mr. Welch, and we're in the army now. Alphatia has the largest army outside of Thyatis and Mystara. The military is spread out between the various nations. Its troops number over 300,000 in total. It has the standard troop types as other armies. There's archers and there's cavalry. Without the large amounts of magical support, the Alphatian military resembles the army of almost every other large nation. They can overwhelm their enemies with the sheer force of numbers, but fortunately Alphatia is happy to consolidate their troops rather than expand their borders. The standard size of the Alphatian army is 25,000 strong, though not all provinces have a force this size. Each of their armies is divided into 5 battalions. Each battalion has 5 regiments. There's 2 companies per regiment, and each company has 5 platoons. The smallest unit is the squad, with 4 squads per platoon. While smaller kingdoms won't have an entire army guarding them, the smallest unit garrisoned to a kingdom will never be smaller than a regiment. The larger nations will have several armies within their borders, and these armies are most commonly found in foreign war zones. Wizards and other spellcasters dominate leadership in the Alphatian military. Non-spellcasters can rise in the ranks. It's one of the only ways for them to advance in Alphatian society normally. The issue is a spellcaster will always outrank a non-spellcaster of equal rank. Seniority means nothing when it comes to magical power. If the Empress appoints a wizard to the rank of Spabed, or General, the newly appointed Spabed automatically outranks all Spabeds without magical powers. This causes all manners of problems, as wizards tend to be fast-tracked for promotion regardless of actual ability. Many wizards are needed on the front lines, but prefer to lead from the back. The habit of Alphatians looking down on those without magic bites them, as wizards fresh to a front will often ignore the experience of the warriors already there. The biggest issue facing the Alphatians is purely logistical. The arming and supplying of each unit is left up to each kingdom. While many follow the example set by the Empress and their forces, many kingdoms don't. This leads to a logistical nightmare during more protracted conflicts, as the various armies don't have the same training or equipment. No standardized training between kingdoms leads to numerous forces with little cohesion. Officers dealing with units from different kingdoms under their command will often try to segregate the less capable units to non-combat positions. That leads to wizards countermanding this tactic from those units who wish to gain glory in combat. The standard tactic of Alphatia can best be described as stand and deliver. While their army often outnumbers their foe, the wizards that lead the troop prefer to use magics to gain a victory. Alphatian wizards will have their forces hold back the enemy while the wizards blast the enemy from the back of the lines. This leads to significant losses to the infantry, something those troops are very well aware of. Wizards will devote more troops to their bodyguards than necessary, depriving the front line of enough forces. A high-level wizard can turn the tide of a battle single-handedly, unleashing a barrage of spells that will devastate a target. The problem with this strategy is the wizards aren't required to study military tactics. They think a simple fireball should break an enemy. When the enemy shows discipline and refuses to rout, the Alphatian wizards won't have a strategy to fall back on. The standard equipment of the Alphatian soldier consists of the cheapest armor and weapons available. Armor is simple padded armor, giving the soldiers the least amount of protection possible, and still calling it armor. Shields are a standard issue, but are a smaller circular shield than the larger tower shields of the Phaeacians. Weapons for infantry are typically simple spears with scimitars for closer combat. Archers will replace their weapons with a short bow and dagger and lose the shield entirely. Cavalry in Alphatia is of varying quality, depending on the kingdom they were raised from. Most are light cavalry, sporting padded armor like the infantry. These riders rely on speed and surprise. They aren't expected to get into combat. There are horse archers in a few kingdoms. They will be given short bows and are trained to harass targets rather than directly engage them. Alphatia does have dedicated heavy cavalry, complete with full plate and lances. These units are quite rare, as most nobles don't want to pay for the high maintenance of these units. They're also still quite effective and one of the most prestigious assignments. Because of that, most heavy cavalry is comprised of politically connected soldiers. On paper, the Alphatian military should crush anyone it opposes. Waves of infantry protected by divine magic while wizards decimate enemy forces with arcane fire. In reality, most nobles can't be bothered to help in the support of the army. They assume somebody else will do it, and they're too busy. The nobles that volunteer their time are usually much lower level, so while they can cast a fireball or two, they quickly run out of spells and longer engagements. Clerics will be used as healers instead of leading troops with support spells, leaving the infantry unprotected against the often far superior enemy forces. As the army relies on the services of more powerful wizards, The unreliable nature of the nobility in terms of support makes it difficult for the army to plan in advance. This will-he, won't-he attitude doesn't just apply to magical spells, but also to material support. Alphatia is famous for its airships, but they're all privately owned. The military has very few flying vessels. The ones they do have are used for command and control or scouting. They're far too valuable to risk an open conflict unless absolutely necessary. The same goes for magical assets like constructs or undead. A stone golem can decimate a small enemy force without effort. Good luck getting Mandrake the Magic Missile Maniac to loan you one. The army doesn't have a supply of constructs waiting. They have to ask the wizards nicely. Worse, if one is destroyed, the wizard has to be reimbursed. Most nobles will not risk their private property to support the army. Again, they assume somebody else is going to come along and help. When Alphatia's military is firing on all cylinders, it's unstoppable. Ranks of enemy troops are incinerated by hellfire. Golems slam into the line, shrugging off enemy attacks with no fear of damage. Longer campaigns will have the enemy dead turned into undead and unleashed in the next battle to spare Alphatian lives. With the Airship Fleet, you've got air support raining down on hostile targets without fear of reprisal. Nothing can stop Alphatians when they have all the supplies they need. Their armies outnumber their Thaiatian equivalent 5-1. They don't need long supply chains because the clerics can feed the army, and golems can dig the fortifications. But unless the Empress can rally the wizards to her, Alphatia, at best, is looking at a standstill in large conflicts. In reality, the nobles only support the army when a massive defeat is imminent. They can't be bothered until the Alphatian army is about to fail. The army might outnumber the Thaiatians, but they have inadequate training, lighter armor, poor leadership, a severe lack of tactical options, and questionable supply lines. To make matters worse, their tactics are so predictable the Thaiatians have developed entire strategies for killing wizards. As long as the nobles find military campaigns beneath their notice, nothing's ever going to improve for the poor Alphatian soldier. As I've stated previously, many of the Alphatian kingdoms veer away from the standard kit of the standard army. The more unusual forces working in the same theater as more traditional forces are what keep their quartermasters up at night. If you've got ranks of archers ready to go and suddenly have a large company of crossbowmen assigned to you, you need to find ammunition for those crossbows. When everyone you're supplying has padded armor, a unit that shows up with chainmail has nothing to equip replacements with. The supply line issue again is plagued with Alphatia's notorious not my problem mentality. The nobles supplied the troops. It's the army's job to equip them, even if the newly arriving regiment looks nothing like the rest of the army. The Empire has a lot of kingdoms, and because of this, the quality of its troops vary greatly. The island of Ne'er-do-well has almost nothing in the way of laws. It does have a military force of dubious quality. They're often supplied with the best weapons and armor that can be stolen by the pirates that work out of their port. They are little more than glorified thugs loyal to their king, and the idea of an outsider giving them orders makes them laugh. The undersea nation of Aquas has a regiment that serves as private security for the kingdom. They were organized and trained by Prince Xandor's lackeys, meaning they are a liability in combat because of their abysmal leadership. The 2 battalions in Haven are considered a joke by other armies. The Queen of Haven has a love of theater that she applies to all aspects of life. Her troops consist of almost nothing but fancifully dressed halberdiers, whose only training seems to be marching up and down the street in front of the royal palace. The army of Shylar is comprised entirely of elves, and while a feared military unit, it also causes other problems because of Alphatia's laws. Since all elves in Alphatia are nobility, every soldier in the Shylar force is an officer. Aside from the problem that their army is the best paid in Alphatia when it comes to working with other regiments, the elves outrank almost everyone. Because of this, to avoid conflict with other units, the elves avoid working in tandem with other nations if at all possible. The nation of Thothia is another feared regiment with the unusual use of undead as their primary soldier. They have quite a few living troops, but Thothians consider being reanimated to fight for their pharaoh a high honor. They will have 3 to 4 times the number of skeletons at any given time than the regular forces in their army. The skeletons act as basic infantry, freeing the mortal troops to serve as archers, engineers, or charioteers. While it's incredibly effective, other Alphatian units avoid serving next to the Thothians for fear of being honored by the clerics to fight on after death. The kingdom of Bedouin is the major exception to everything I just said. The nation has the best-run army in all of Alphatia. Nobles serve in the armed forces willingly, and magical assets like airships and golems are incorporated into the nation's order of battle. They drill their troops, and while the equipment is still light armor and spears, at least the soldiers are properly trained. Nobles are kept separate from the command staff unless they've proved themselves, preventing anyone from pulling rank. While the Bedouin armies are only a tiny portion of the Alphatian military, they're known outside the nation as the best Alphatia has to offer. You wanted to know why Alphatia hasn't conquered the world. It's because their army is incompetent. The nation's chaotic nature makes it challenging to organize an actual fighting force. But the people that make the army powerful can't be bothered to tear themselves away from their hobbies unless browbeat by the Empress. Next week we're going to the Savage Coast to look at another obscure creature, or creatures in this case, the Banner Creatures, or what happens when a noble impresses an immortal so much that he gets a pat on the head and a magical flag. But until then, remember, no plan survives contact with the enemy.